The shadow of a lone cottonwood tree stretched across the parched earth like a merciful hand as Clara Wilson stumbled upon the motionless figure sprawled beneath its branches, his face half buried in the arid soil of the New Mexico territory. The summer of 1878 had been unforgivably harsh, and death was no stranger to these lands, but something made Clara pause rather than hurry past this seemingly doomed cowboy. Clara approached cautiously, her worn boots kicking up dust that danced in the merciless sunlight. She clutched the rifle her father had given her before he passed a necessary companion for a woman traveling alone in these parts. As she drew closer, she could see the man was still breathing, though each breath seemed labored, his broad shoulders rising and falling with painful effort. "Mr." Clara called, keeping a safe distance. "Can you hear me?" The man stirred, struggling to lift his head. His hat had fallen to the side, revealing dark hair matted with sweat and dirt. When he managed to turn toward her voice, Clara could see his face was flushed with fever, his eyes glazed but startlingly blue against his sun-weathered skin. "Water," he croaked, the single word barely audible. Clara hesitated only a moment before unhooking her canteen from her saddle. Her own supplies were limited, but she couldn't leave this man to die of thirst and fever. She knelt beside him, gently lifting his head to help him drink. After a few desperate swallows, recognition flickered in his fevered eyes. "You came," he whispered, a note of disbelief in his voice. Something about his words struck Clara strangely, as though he'd been expecting her specifically rather than any random traveler. "Always would," she replied automatically, unsure why those words had come to her lips, yet they felt right somehow. The man's eyes closed again, but a ghost of a smile touched his cracked lips before he slipped back into unconsciousness. Clara sat back on her heels, studying the stranger. He wore the typical attire of a cowboy: denim pants, cotton shirt now soaked with sweat, leather vest, and boots with spurs that had seen better days. A gun belt was fastened around his waist, the holster empty. No sign of his weapon nearby. The brand on his saddle indicated he worked for the Circle Q Ranch, one of the larger spreads in the territory. She glanced around, noting his horse grazing nearby, still saddled but looking as exhausted as its master. Clara made her decision quickly. She couldn't leave him here, and nightfall would bring cooler temperatures but also predators of both the animal and human variety. "Well, mister," she murmured, "looks like we're traveling together for a spell." It took all her strength to heave the unconscious man over his saddle in a fireman's carry. She secured him as best she could, collected his few belongings, and mounted her own horse. Leading his mare, Clara set off toward the small cabin she'd inherited from her father, just a few miles away. The journey seemed interminable, with her frequent stops to check on the feverish stranger, ensuring he hadn't slipped from the saddle. By the time the modest cabin came into view, the sun was setting, painting the vast landscape in fiery hues that matched the fever burning through the cowboy's body. Clara's cabin sat at the edge of a small creek, one of the few reliable water sources in the area. It was a simple structure: one main room with a stone fireplace, a small separate bedroom, and a lean-to that served as a storage area. Not much, but it was hers, and it offered shelter from the harsh elements. Getting the cowboy inside proved even more challenging than loading him onto his horse. Clara was strong from years of handling her father's ranch alone, but the man was solid muscle beneath his trail-worn clothes. Eventually, she managed to drag him to her father's old bed, where he lay motionless except for the rapid rise and fall of his chest. In the lamplight, Clara could better assess his condition. The fever had a vicious hold on him. She set about her work methodically, removing his boots, vest, and shirt to cool his overheated body. A nasty-looking wound on his left side, just below his ribs, told the story his unconscious lips could not. The edges were inflamed and hot-to-the-touch infection had set in. "So you're not just suffering the heat like the rest of us," Clara muttered as she gathered clean cloths, her small supply of medicines, and a basin of cool water from the creek. "Someone wanted you dead, Cowboy." As she cleaned the wound, the man groaned but didn't wake. Clara worked through the night, changing the cool compresses on his forehead, cleaning the wound repeatedly, and forcing sips of water between his parched lips whenever possible. She mixed a poultice of herbs her father had taught her to use, applying it to the angry wound, before bandaging it with clean strips of cloth. By dawn, Clara was exhausted, her eyes burning from lack of sleep. She'd moved her rocking chair next to the bed to keep vigil, but as the first light of morning filtered through the small window, she allowed herself to doze. "Who are you?" The hoarse question jolted her awake. The cowboy was conscious, his blue eyes clearer than they had been the day before, fixed intently on her face. "I should be asking you that," Clara replied, reaching for the water pitcher. "You're the one bleeding on my father's quilt." A flash of confusion crossed his features. "Your father's." "He passed last winter," Clara said matter-of-factly, helping him take a sip of water. "I'm Clara Wilson." The man studied her for a long moment. "Nathan Quinn," he finally said. "Most folks call me Nate." "Well, Nate Quinn, you've got a nasty wound and a fever that nearly cooked your brain. Want to tell me who put that hole in your side?" Nate attempted to sit up, wincing at the pain. "Ambush, 3 men, don't know who sent them." Clara gently pushed him back down. "Stay still. That wound needs time to heal properly." "I can't stay here," he protested, though the effort of speaking seemed to drain what little strength he had. "They might track me. You'd be in danger." "I've been in danger since I was born female in this territory," Clara said dryly. "Besides, no one knows you're here. I found you miles from anywhere, half dead under a cottonwood." Nate's eyes clouded with confusion again. "You found me. I remember your voice, you said." He trailed off, seemingly struggling to separate dreams from reality. "I said I'd always come," Clara finished, remembering their strange exchange. "Though I don't know why I said that to a stranger." A shadow of something, memory perhaps, or simply pain, crossed Nate's face. "Not a stranger," he murmured before his eyes drifted closed again. Clara frowned, studying his features more carefully. There was something vaguely familiar about him, but she couldn't place it. She'd met many cowboys in her 22 years on the frontier, especially during the time her father's ranch had been operational, before the drought. Before the cattle fever, before everything had fallen apart, she shook off the thoughts and rose to prepare a simple breakfast. Nate needed nourishment if he was going to fight off the infection. Over the next 3 days, Clara tended to Nate's wound, which slowly began to show signs of improvement. The angry red streaks receded, and his fever broke on the second night, leaving him weak but lucid. He slept most of the time, his body demanding rest to heal. During his waking hours, they spoke little. Nate seemed guarded, offering only the most basic information about himself. He was 31, had been working at the Circle Q for nearly 2 years, and before that had drifted between ranches across Texas and the territories. Clara, in turn, told him about her father's failed ranch and her current living hunting, trapping, and occasionally guiding travelers through the territory. On the 4th morning, Clara returned from checking her traps to find Nate sitting at her small table, dressed in his pants and a clean shirt she'd washed for him. "You shouldn't be up," she admonished, setting down the pair of rabbits she'd caught. "Been lying down long enough," Nate replied, though his face was pale from the exertion. "Figured I'd at least try to earn my keep while you've been playing nursemaid." Clara raised an eyebrow. "And how do you propose to do that with a hole in your side? I can still whittle." He nodded toward a small pile of wood shavings on the table and the beginnings of a carved figure. "Noticed your chair's missing a spindle, thought I might fix it." The gesture, small as it was, touched Clara unexpectedly. Few men in her experience had ever considered what might be useful to her. "That's kind of you," she said, turning away quickly to hide the sudden warmth in her cheeks. As she prepared the rabbits for stewing, Nate worked quietly with his knife, occasionally glancing in her direction. The silence between them was comfortable, reminiscent of the easy quiet Clara had shared with her father during long winter evenings. "Your father taught you how to live out here alone?" Nate finally asked. Clara nodded. "Ma died when I was 8. After that, it was just Pa and me. He made sure I could hunt, shoot, track, and defend myself." A sad smile touched her lips. "Said he couldn't always be around to protect me, so I'd better learn to protect myself." "Wise man." "He was," Clara agreed, "until the drink got hold of him after we lost the ranch. Then." She trailed off, not wanting to speak ill of her father. "Hard times can break even strong men," Nate observed quietly. Clara looked at him sharply, sensing he spoke from experience. "Is that what happened to you, hard times?" A shadow crossed Nate's face. "Something like that." Before Clara could press further, the sound of approaching horses drew both their attention. Nate stiffened, his hand instinctively reaching for a weapon that wasn't there. "My rifle's by the door," Clara said quietly. "Your revolver's in the drawer beside the bed." Nate moved with surprising speed for an injured man, retrieving his gun while Clara took up her rifle and positioned herself at the window. "3 riders," she reported. "Coming fast. Description." Nate's voice had changed, all trace of the wounded man gone, replaced by something harder and more dangerous. "2 rough-looking men I don't recognize. The third." Clara squinted, then inhaled sharply. "The third is Marshal Camden," Nate swore under his breath. "Camden's as crooked as they come. He's in the pocket of the cattle barons." He checked his revolver, ensuring it was loaded. "Clara, I need you to slip out the back, get to your horse and ride for Silver Creek. Find a man named Caleb at the general store. Tell him Nate sent you." Clara turned from the window, her expression defiant. "This is my home. I'm not running." "These men won't hesitate to kill you to get to me," Nate said urgently. "Please, Clara, I can't have your blood on my hands too." The anguish in his voice gave Clara pause. Who else's blood do you carry, Nate Quinn?" Before he could answer, a voice called from outside. "Nathan Quinn, we know you're in there. Come out with your hands up and maybe the woman doesn't have to get hurt." Clara's jaw set. "You know what? I think I've had just about enough of men threatening me on my own property." Before Nate could stop her, she moved to the doorway, keeping her body shielded by the frame but calling out, "Marshal Camden, this is private property and you're trespassing." "Miss Wilson," the marshal's voice held false cordiality, "I'm afraid we're here on official business. That man you're harboring is wanted for murder." Clara glanced back at Nate, whose face had gone hard as stone. "Is that true?" she asked quietly. "No," he said flatly. "But they'll kill us both and call it justice if we give them the chance." Clara believed him. Something in his eyes told her he was speaking the truth. She'd always prided herself on being a good judge of character. It was a necessary skill for survival out here. "Marshal," she called, "I think there's been a misunderstanding. Mr. Quinn has been gravely injured. He's in no condition to travel." "Then we'll wait for him to recover," came the cold reply. "In a cell." Clara cast about for options. 3 against 2 with Nate injured weren't favorable odds, but she knew the land better than they did, and her cabin had been built with defense in mind. "I have an idea," she whispered to Nate. "There's a trapdoor under the rug in the bedroom. Pa built a small cellar for storing preserves and hiding from Apache raids. If I can draw them around to the front, you might be able to slip out the back and circle behind them." Nate shook his head. "Too risky for you?" "Got a better plan?" Clara challenged, the corner of Nate's mouth quirked up in what might have been admiration. "Not at the moment." "Then trust me, I've been handling men like Camden all my life." After a moment's hesitation, Nate nodded. "Be careful." Clara moved back to the window. "Marshal, I'm coming out to talk. Don't shoot." She exited slowly, her rifle held non-threateningly at her side. Marshal Camden sat astride a well-groomed bay horse, flanked by 2 rough-looking men whose eyes held no warmth. Clara recognized the type hired guns who enjoyed their work too much. "Miss Wilson," Camden greeted her, tipping his hat with mock courtesy. "Where's Quinn?" "Unconscious," Clara lied smoothly. "Fever's got him delirious. I found him half dead 3 days ago." Camden's eyes narrowed. Mind if we verify that for ourselves? Actually, I do mind, Clara said, standing her ground. This is my home and I don't recall issuing an invitation. One of the gunmen snickered. Feisty little thing, ain't she? Camden silenced him with a look before turning his attention back to Clara. Miss Wilson, harboring a fugitive is a serious offense. I'd hate to see you face charges. And what exactly is he fugitive from? Clara asked, deliberately raising her voice to give Nate time to position himself. Last I checked, working for the Circle Q wasn't a crime. A flash of annoyance crossed Camden's features. He's wanted for the murder of Joseph Blackwater, one of the territory's most respected citizens. Clara couldn't contain her derisive laugh. Respected, Blackwater was a land grabber and a bully. Everyone knows it. Careful, Miss Wilson, Camden warned. Your father's not around to protect you anymore. The taunt hit its mark, but Clara kept her expression neutral. I don't need protection, Marshal. Now, unless you have a properly issued warrant, I suggest you take your men and leave my property. Camden's face darkened. I don't think you understand the situation. A gunshot cracked the air, the bullet kicking up dirt inches from Camden's horse. The animal reared in panic, nearly unseating the marshal. Next one won't miss, Nate's voice called from somewhere to their right. Drop your weapons, all of you. The two hired guns swiveled toward the sound, but Nate had positioned himself well, using the natural cover of boulders and scrub. You're outnumbered, Quinn, Camden snarled, fighting to control his horse. Maybe, Nate conceded, but I'm betting at least one of you won't ride away if this turns ugly. Who wants to take that chance? Clara saw the calculation in the hired gun's eyes. They hadn't signed up for a fair fight. Marshal, one of them said nervously, maybe we should come back with more men. Camden looked furious but evidently reached the same conclusion. This isn't over, Quinn, he called. Miss Wilson, consider carefully the company you keep. Next time I won't be so understanding. The three men backed their horses away, keeping their eyes on the area where Nate's voice had come from. Only when they had disappeared from view did Nate emerge from his cover, his face pale from exertion, a fresh spot of blood staining his shirt where his wound had reopened. Clara hurried to his side, supporting him as he stumbled. You're bleeding again, you fool. Worth it, Nate grunted, leaning heavily on her as they made their way back to the cabin. They'll be back, though, with more men. Then we'd better be gone before they return, Clara said decisively. Once you're patched up, we're leaving. Nate looked at her in surprise. We? Yes, we, Clara said firmly, helping him to a chair. You need someone to keep you from bleeding to death, and I'm apparently harboring a fugitive now. Besides, I want to know what's really going on. While she rebandaged his wound, Nate finally told her the truth. Joseph Blackwater had been trying to expand his already substantial holdings by forcing smaller ranchers to sell. Those who refused often faced mysterious accidents, stolen cattle, or poisoned water sources. Nate had been hired by the Circle Q not just as a cowhand, but as protection, his reputation as a former Texas Ranger preceding him. 3 weeks ago, I caught some of Blackwater's men tampering with the Circle Q-Tick's water supply, Nate explained. There was a confrontation. I reported it to the owner and he confronted Blackwater directly. Let me guess, Clara said grimly. Something happened to your boss. Nate nodded. Samuel Quincy was found dead the next day, thrown from his horse according to the official report. But Samuel was practically born in the saddle, and Blackwater, shot dead 2 days later. I was framed neatly for it. My gun was stolen and used for the murder. By the time I realized what was happening, Camden and his men were already calling for my arrest. Clara sat back, processing the information. So who really killed Blackwater? Camden? I suspect Camden was involved, but he's not the mastermind, Nate said. Someone wants the Circle Q badly enough to kill for it. With Samuel dead and his only heir living back east, it's vulnerable. And you were in the way, Clara finished. Nate's eyes met hers. I still am. They set out at dusk, traveling under the cover of darkness. Clara had packed efficiently only what they could carry on their horses. Her father's old saddlebags held food, medical supplies, and ammunition. She'd left most of her possessions behind, but the deed to her land was securely tucked inside her coat, along with her mother's locket and her father's pocket watch. Nate had insisted they avoid towns and main roads, which meant a longer, more difficult journey to Silver Creek where his trusted friend Caleb waited. Clara didn't mind. She knew the backcountry well, having hunted these lands since childhood. They made camp in a sheltered canyon the first night, building only a small fire that wouldn't be visible from a distance. As they sat across from each other in the firelight, Clara found herself studying Nate's features, trying again to place why he seemed familiar. "You're staring," Nate observed, a hint of amusement in his voice despite their situation. Clara didn't look away. "I can't shake the feeling we've met before." Nate poked at the fire with a stick, his expression thoughtful. "We have," he said finally. "Though you were just a girl, then probably 12 or 13, I came through with a cattle drive. Your father let us water our herd at your creek." Clara's eyes widened as the memory surfaced. "The young ranger," she breathed. "Pa was impressed with you, said you had a good head on your shoulders." A genuine smile softened Nate's features. "Charles Wilson, good man, tough but fair, he bragged about his daughter who could outshoot most of his hands." "You remember that?" Clara asked, surprised. "I remember thinking it was just tall talk," Nate admitted. "Then I saw you bring down that hawk with your father's rifle. Prettiest shot I'd ever seen." He paused, then added softly, "Made by the prettiest girl I'd ever seen." Heat rushed to Clara's cheeks and she looked away. "That was a lifetime ago, not so long," Nate countered. 6 years, maybe 7. "Long enough for everything to change," Clara said, an edge of bitterness in her voice. "The drought came, then the fever killed half our herd, the bank took most of our land, Pa started drinking." She stared into the flames. "He wasn't the same after that." Nate was quiet for a moment. "I'm sorry," he said simply. "I came back through about 3 years ago, stopped by your ranch, but it was abandoned." Clara looked up sharply. "You came back, why?" Now it was Nate's turn to look uncomfortable. "Just passing through," he said, but something in his tone suggested there was more to it. Before Clara could press him further, a distant sound caught their attention: horses approaching. "Put out the fire," Nate whispered, instantly alert. Clara quickly smothered the flames with dirt while Nate moved to the horses, keeping them quiet with gentle hands and soft words. They withdrew deeper into the shadows of the canyon, weapons ready. 4 riders passed along the ridge above them, their silhouettes visible against the night sky. Clara and Nate remained motionless until the sounds of hoofbeats faded. "Camden?" Clara asked quietly. Nate nodded grimly. "He works fast. We need to be more careful." They spent a restless night, taking turns keeping watch. By dawn, they were on the move again, following game trails and dry creek beds that wouldn't leave obvious tracks. Nate's wound was healing, but the exertion of travel clearly pained him, though he never complained. As the day wore on, the landscape began to change, the flat desert giving way to rolling hills covered with juniper and pinyon pine. They stopped to rest in the shade of a rocky outcropping, the horses gratefully drinking from a small spring. "We're making good time," Nate said, checking the sun's position. "Should reach Silver Creek by tomorrow evening if we push on." Clara nodded, offering him the canteen. As he drank, she noticed the lines of pain around his eyes. "How's your side?" "Healing," Nate replied automatically. Clara gave him a skeptical look. "Let me check it." After a moment's hesitation, Nate unbuttoned his shirt. Clara carefully removed the bandage, relieved to see the wound was indeed healing cleanly, though the skin around it was still tender and bruised. "Better than I expected," she admitted, applying a fresh poultice and bandage. Her fingers worked gently, aware of the warmth of his skin beneath her touch. When she finished, she looked up to find him watching her, his blue eyes intent. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for all of this." Not many would have stopped for a stranger, let alone risked their lives for one. Clara busied herself with putting away the medical supplies. "I don't think we were ever really strangers," she said softly. "Not really." Something shifted in Nate's expression, a softening around his eyes. He reached out, his calloused hand covering hers. "No," he agreed, "I don't think we were." The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken thoughts. Then the sound of a snapping twig broke the spell. Both turned toward the noise, instantly on alert. A lone figure stood at the edge of the clearing, a young Apache man, regarding them with wary curiosity. He carried no visible weapons, but both Clara and Nate knew that meant little. Clara slowly stood, keeping her movements non-threatening. "Hello," she said in the Apache tongue, her pronunciation rough but understandable. "We mean no harm." The young man's eyebrows rose slightly in surprise at her use of his language. "You are being hunted," he replied in accented English. "4 men, they offer gold for information." Nate had risen as well, his hand near his gun but not on it. "They're not friends of ours," he said carefully. The Apache nodded. "This I know. They have the smell of coyotes, they hunt in packs but have no honor." His dark eyes assessed them. "You, woman, you healed this man," Clara nodded. "He was wounded." Something like approval flickered in the young man's expression. "My people camp nearby. My grandmother is a healer. She would speak with you." Clara and Nate exchanged glances, silently weighing their options. The Apache might offer protection from Camden and his men, but entering their camp carried its own risks. "Why would your grandmother want to speak with me?" Clara asked. The young man's lips curved in a slight smile. "She says the spirits showed her a pale woman who speaks with the plants." "She believes this is you." Clara blinked in surprise. Her knowledge of medicinal plants had come from her mother, who had learned from an old Apache woman herself many years ago. The connection seemed strange, almost mystical. "We would be honored," Nate answered for both of them, seeming to sense Clara's curiosity. "But we are being pursued. We would not bring trouble to your people." The Apache made a dismissive gesture. "The men who hunt you will not find our camp. They are blind in the desert." With few alternatives and the prospect of temporary safety appealing, Clara and Nate gathered their belongings and followed their guide deeper into the hills. The Apache moved with the confidence of someone on familiar ground, leading them through passages and gullies that would have been invisible to less experienced eyes. After nearly an hour of travel, they came upon the camp, a collection of wickiups situated in a protected valley with access to water. Women worked at cooking fires while children played nearby. Several men looked up as the strangers approached, their expressions guarded but not hostile. Their guide led them to one of the larger structures, where an elderly woman sat working a piece of leather. Despite her age, her fingers moved with remarkable dexterity, and her dark eyes were sharp as they assessed the newcomers. "Grandmother," the young man said respectfully in Apache, "I have brought them." The old woman nodded slowly, her gaze fixing on Clara. "Sit," she said in English, gesturing to the ground before her. Clara did as instructed, Nate settling beside her with a barely concealed wince of pain. "Your man is hurt," the old woman observed. Clara felt her cheeks warm at the words "your man," but didn't correct her. "Yes, he was shot." "The wound is healing, but slowly." The elderly healer nodded. "Show me." Nate obliged, revealing the bandaged wound. The old woman examined it carefully, nodding in approval at Clara's handiwork. "You use the plants well," she said. "Who taught you?" "My mother," Clara replied. "She learned from an Apache healer near Fort Stanton many years ago." The old woman's eyes widened slightly. "I had a sister who lived near that fort. She taught many pale women about the plants." "Her name was Morning Dove," Clara said, remembering her mother's stories. The healer went still. "My sister," she confirmed, wonder in her voice. "The spirits do not make mistakes. You are welcome here, daughter of my sister's student." The coincidence seemed too great to be mere chance, and Clara felt a strange sense of homecoming despite being among people she had just met. The old woman who introduced herself as White Willow insisted on treating Nate's wound with her own medicines, which she claimed would speed the healing. That evening, they shared a meal with the Apache family, the tension of the past days easing somewhat in the security of the camp. White Willow spoke of her sister and asked Clara many questions about the plants she knew and used. Nate listened intently, his eyes rarely leaving Clara's animated face as she conversed with the elder. As night fell, they were given a small wickiup to share an arrangement that caused both to exchange awkward glances before Nate gallantly offered to sleep outside. "Don't be ridiculous," Clara said practically. "Your wound needs rest, not a cold night on hard ground. There's room enough for both of us." The small shelter was indeed large enough for two, though just barely. They lay side by side on soft hides, acutely aware of each other's proximity in the darkness. "Your mother must have been remarkable," Nate said softly after a long silence. "To learn from the Apache to pass that knowledge to you." Clara turned her head toward his voice. She was. She believed in finding common ground with people, no matter how different they seemed. She paused. "What about your family, Nate? You've never mentioned them." There was a long silence, and Clara thought perhaps he'd fallen asleep. Then his deep voice came quietly through the darkness. "My father was a Texas Ranger. He died when I was 15, ambushed while tracking cattle rustlers. My mother followed a year later. Grief, the doctor said, though I think it was a broken heart." He paused. "I have a younger sister in San Antonio, married with 2 little ones. I visit when I can, but this life doesn't lend itself to family ties." "Is that why you never settled anywhere?" Clara asked, always drifting from ranch to ranch. Another silence. "Partly," Nate admitted, "and partly because I never found a place that felt like home, not until—" He trailed off. "Not until what?" she felt rather than saw him turn toward her in the darkness. "Not until I saw you again," he said softly. "Standing on your porch with that rifle, ready to defend your home against 3 armed men, brave as any ranger I've ever known." Clara's breath caught in her throat. "Nate, I know it's not the time," he interrupted gently. "We're running for our lives. You barely know me. But I've thought about that girl with the rifle for years, Clara. I rode back to your ranch hoping to find her grown. When the place was abandoned, I asked around town until someone told me your father had lost the land. You looked for me." Clara whispered, astonished. "I did," Nate confirmed. "Then life got in the way. The job at Circle Q, Blackwater's schemes, Samuel's murder, but finding you in the desert, hearing you say always would when I wasn't even sure if I was dreaming." He reached out, his hand finding hers in the darkness. It felt like the world righting itself somehow. Clara's heart pounded so loudly she was certain he must hear it. The intensity of his words, the warmth of his hand on hers, the strange sense of destiny that had been following them since the moment she'd found him beneath that cottonwood, it was overwhelming. "I don't believe in coincidence anymore," she said at last. "Not after today, not after finding you." His fingers tightened around hers. "Get some rest," he murmured. "Tomorrow we ride for Silver Creek, and with luck we'll finally get some answers." They remained that way through the night, hands joined in the darkness, a bridge across the space between their bodies and their separate pasts. Morning brought clarity and purpose. White Willow had replaced Nate's bandages with her own healing poultice, and already he moved with greater ease, the pain in his side noticeably diminished. The old healer refused Clara's thanks, insisting that healing was a gift that required no gratitude. "The plants speak to those who listen," she told Clara. "My sister heard them, your mother heard them, and you hear them too." She pressed a small deerskin pouch into Clara's hands, "Seeds, for when you find your home." The certainty in the woman's voice that Clara would indeed find a home brought unexpected tears to her eyes. "Thank you," she said, carefully tucking the pouch into her saddlebag. Their young guide, who introduced himself as Running Fox, offered to escort them part of the way to Silver Creek, ensuring they avoided the men who hunted them. Nate accepted gratefully, and by mid-morning they were on their way, taking a route through the hills that would be difficult to track. "Your grandmother is extraordinary," Clara told Running Fox as they rode. "Her knowledge of plants and healing is impressive." Running Fox nodded. "She is respected by all. Even the white doctor from the fort comes to ask her advice sometimes." He glanced at Nate. "Your wound heals well." Her medicine is strong. Stronger than anything I've ever used, Nate agreed, rotating his shoulder experimentally. I feel like I've gained a week of healing overnight. They traveled steadily through the day, making good time despite the rough terrain. Running Fox left them in the early afternoon at a point where the hills gave way to more open country, pointing out the distant smudge on the horizon that was Silver Creek. Be cautious, he warned. The men who hunt you passed through here yesterday. They may still be nearby. With renewed vigilance, Clara and Nate continued their journey, approaching Silver Creek from the east rather than taking the main road. The town was typical of frontier settlements, a main street lined with wooden buildings, a few side streets with modest houses, a church whose white steeple seemed to reach for the vast sky above. Caleb's store is on the far end of town, Nate said as they surveyed the settlement from a ridge. We'll wait until dusk before going in. Less chance of being spotted that way. Clara nodded, studying the movement of people in the streets below. No sign of Camden or his men, she observed, but that doesn't mean they're not around. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, they made their way cautiously down from the ridge, leaving their horses concealed in a stand of trees at the edge of town. On foot, they slipped through back alleys and between buildings, avoiding the main thoroughfare where lamplights were beginning to illuminate the gathering darkness. Caleb's general store sat at the far end of town, a two-story building with living quarters above. A sign in the window indicated it was closed for the day, but a light burned in the upstairs window. Nate led Clara to the back door, knocking in a specific pattern, 3 quick raps, a pause, then 2 more. After a moment, they heard movement inside, and the door opened a crack to reveal a cautious eye. "Quinn," a voice whispered. "It's me, Caleb," Nate confirmed. "With a friend." The door swung open to reveal a wiry man with graying red hair and a neat beard. He ushered them inside quickly, securing the door behind them. "Damn, man, I thought you were dead," he said, clasping Nate's shoulder. His gaze shifted to Clara, curious but not unfriendly. "And who might this be?" "Clara Wilson," Nate said. "She saved my life." "Clara, this is Caleb Fisher, former ranger and the most trustworthy man in 3 territories." Caleb's weather-beaten face creased in a smile as he shook Clara's hand. "Any friend of Quinn's is welcome here, especially one who kept this fool alive." He gestured toward the stairs. "Come up." "It's not safe to talk down here. Too many ears in town lately." The upstairs living quarters were modest but comfortable, a small sitting area with a stove, a table with 4 chairs, and doors leading to what Clara presumed were bedrooms. A rifle stood ready by the window that overlooked the main street, and Clara noted the way Caleb positioned himself away from the light as he moved around the room. "Camden's been through," Caleb confirmed once they were seated with cups of strong coffee. "Him and those 2 thugs he calls deputies. Plus a new face, fancy-dressed fellow from back east, throwing money around like it grows on trees." Nate leaned forward. "Description: tall, thin, city clothes, spectacles, calls himself Anderson, claims he's here representing the heir to the Circle Q, Samuel's nephew." Nate and Clara exchanged glances. "Samuel's nephew is 10 years old," Nate said flatly. "Lives with his mother in Boston." Caleb nodded grimly. "Thought it didn't sound right. This Anderson's been meeting with Camden daily, and they've been offering rewards for information on your whereabouts." "Any idea who he really is?" Clara asked. "None," Caleb admitted. "But he's connected. Got a telegram yesterday that had him looking mighty pleased, been even more determined to find you since then." He eyed Nate seriously. "What exactly did you stumble into, Quinn?" Nate related the events of the past week's Samuel's murder, Blackwater's death, his own framing. Caleb listened intently, occasionally asking pointed questions that revealed his investigative background. "Land grab," he concluded when Nate finished. "Classic, but bigger than usual. The Circle Q controls water rights for half the valley. Whoever owns it essentially controls all the surrounding spreads." "But who's behind it?" Clara asked. "This Anderson must be working for someone." Caleb stroked his beard thoughtfully. There's been talk of a railroad coming through. New line connecting to the east. Having control of the water rights would put someone in a mighty powerful negotiating position. Railroad money, Nate murmured. That would explain the resources they've put into hunting me down. He looked troubled. If that's what this is about, they won't stop. Too much at stake. Which means we need proof, Clara said decisively. Something that ties Anderson and Camden to the murders. Both men looked at her with surprise and she raised an eyebrow. What? You think I'm just going to hide while you two handle everything? I'm already a fugitive by association. A slow smile spread across Nate's face. Wouldn't dream of suggesting otherwise, Miss Wilson, Caleb chuckled. I like her, Quinn, he sobered quickly, but she's right, we need proof, and I think I know where to start looking. Camden keeps his important papers in a safe in his office. If there's evidence connecting him to the railroad interests or the murders, it'll be there. Breaking into the marshal's office, Nate said dryly. That'll certainly improve our situation if we're caught. Got a better idea? Caleb challenged. Nate sighed. Unfortunately, no, he turned to Clara. This isn't your fight. You could stay here while we don't even finish that sentence, Clara interrupted. I didn't come all this way to sit safely by the fire while you risk your necks. She leaned forward, her expression determined. Besides, you need me. Neither of you can pass unnoticed in town, but I can. What do you mean? Nate asked, frowning. Clara smiled. When was the last time anyone looked closely at a woman in a calico dress running errands? I could walk right past Camden himself, and he'd never look twice at me dressed properly. Caleb snapped his fingers. She's right, Quinn, and I've got just the thing. He disappeared into one of the back rooms, returning moments later with a dress, shawl, and bonnet. My sister's. She stays with me sometimes. The plan came together quickly. Clara would venture into town the next day, dressed as a respectable young woman, ostensibly shopping at the various establishments. Her real purpose would be to observe Camden's movements and determine the best time to access his office. Meanwhile, Caleb would make inquiries about Anderson, and Nate would remain hidden at the store, his distinctive appearance too recognizable to risk exposure. None of them were under any illusion about the danger, but the alternative, continuing to run without clearing Nate's name, was equally perilous. At least this way, they had a chance of finding evidence that might end the pursuit. As night deepened, Caleb showed them to the spare bedroom. Only got the one extra room, he apologized. But it's got a decent bed. I'll take the chair by the stove. Clara felt heat rise to her cheeks at the implication, but Nate spoke before she could. I'll take the floor in here, Caleb. Miss Wilson can have the bed. Caleb raised an eyebrow but didn't comment, simply providing extra blankets before bidding them good night. When the door closed behind him, Clara turned to Nate. You don't have to sleep on the floor. Your wound is healing nicely, Nate finished. I've slept on worse than a wooden floor, Clara. She knew he was being honorable, protecting her reputation even in these unusual circumstances. The thought warmed her, though a small part of her wondered what it might be like to share that narrow bed, to feel his strength beside her through the night as they had in the wickiup. At least take this, she said, handing him the thicker of the quilts Caleb had provided. Their fingers brushed in the exchange and Nate's hand lingered, capturing hers. Clara, he said quietly, I want you to know that whatever happens tomorrow, I don't, she interrupted softly. Don't say goodbye, Nate. It's bad luck. He studied her face in the lamplight, then nodded slowly. Not goodbye then, he agreed. Just thank you for everything. Clara slipped her hand free reluctantly and prepared for bed, conscious of Nate's presence as he made his pallet on the floor. Even after the lamp was extinguished, she lay awake in the darkness, listening to his breathing, wondering at the strange path that had brought them together and what tomorrow might bring. Morning dawned clear and bright, the town of Silver Creek already bustling with activity when Clara ventured out, dressed in Caleb's sister's clothing. The calico dress was a bit loose but presentable, and with her hair neatly arranged beneath the bonnet, she looked like any other young woman running errands. She moved from store to store, making small purchases a spool of thread, a packet of tea while carefully observing the town and its inhabitants. The marshal's office was situated near the center of town, a solid building with barred windows and a jail cell visible at the back. Camden himself emerged mid-morning, accompanied by the well-dressed stranger who could only be Anderson. They headed for the hotel restaurant, deep in conversation. Clara followed at a discreet distance, selecting a table near enough to overhear fragments of their discussion. "Expected confirmation by now," Anderson was saying, his accent distinctly Eastern. "The papers must be in order before the end of the month." Camden's reply was too low to catch, but Anderson's response was clear enough. "Then find Quinn. The boy's guardian won't sign until the matter is resolved." Too many questions. Clara lingered over her tea, absorbing what she'd heard. They were in a hurry that might work to their advantage. She paid for her drink and left, circling back toward the marshal's office. With Camden at breakfast, this might be their best opportunity. She hurried back to the general store, slipping in through the back entrance. Nate and Caleb were waiting anxiously, both looking relieved at her return. "Camden and Anderson are at the hotel restaurant," she reported quickly. "The office appears empty. And they're in a rush to complete whatever they're planning, something about papers needing to be in order by the end of the month." "The land transfer," Caleb guessed. "If they're trying to secure the Circle Q for the railroad, they'd need to complete the purchase before construction begins." Nate was already checking his revolver. "This might be our only chance. We need to move now while Camden's occupied." Caleb nodded, retrieving a set of picks from a drawer. "I'll get us into the office. Quinn, you know what we're looking for." "Clara, I'm coming with you," she stated firmly, already removing the bonnet. "I'll keep watch outside." Neither man argued. They left through the back door, Caleb leading them through service alleys to approach the marshal's office from behind. The rear door was locked but yielded quickly to Caleb's skilled hands. They slipped inside, finding themselves in the empty jail area. Beyond, a door led to Camden's office proper. 5 minutes, Caleb whispered. "No more." "Clara, if you see anyone approaching, 3 short whistles," she confirmed, positioning herself by a side window where she could observe the street without being easily seen. Nate and Caleb moved quickly to the office, heading straight for the safe mounted on the wall behind Camden's desk. Clara divided her attention between the street and the men's progress, anxiety building with each passing second. Caleb worked on the safe with practiced efficiency, his ear pressed to the metal as he manipulated the dial. After what seemed an eternity, there was a soft click and the door swung open. Nate began rifling through the contents, pulling out folders and documents, scanning them rapidly. "Railroad contracts," he confirmed, holding up one set of papers. "And here correspondence with someone named Harrington at Eastern Pacific Railway." He continued searching, then suddenly went still. "Got it," he breathed, extracting a telegram. "Instructions to eliminate Samuel Quincy and frame me for Blackwater's murder. Signed H. Harrington," Caleb concluded. "That's our man." A movement in the street caught Clara's attention. Camden and Anderson were returning, earlier than expected. "They're coming back," she hissed, giving the warning whistle. Nate quickly gathered the incriminating documents while Caleb closed the safe, spinning the dial. They had almost reached the back door when the front door of the office opened. "What the hell?" Camden's voice rang out as he spotted the intruders. Everything happened at once. Camden drew his gun, shouting for them to freeze. Anderson backed away, fumbling for something in his coat. Nate pushed Clara toward the back door while Caleb overturned a desk to provide cover. "Go," Caleb yelled. "Get those papers to Judge McAllister in Tucson. He's honest." A shot rang out, splintering the wood near Clara's head. Nate returned fire, creating enough distraction for her to make it through the door. He followed seconds later, Caleb covering their escape. "Run for the horses," Nate ordered, tucking the documents inside his shirt. They raced through the alley, the sounds of pursuit close behind. Clara's heart pounded in her ears as they sprinted for the edge of town where their horses waited. More gunshots echoed behind them, and she heard Nate grunt in pain but didn't dare slow down to check. They reached the horses, mounting quickly. As they turned to flee, Clara saw Caleb emerge from between buildings, running hard with Camden in pursuit. "Go," Caleb shouted, veering away from them to draw Camden off. "Get to Tucson?" Clara hesitated, unwilling to abandon their ally, but Nate grabbed her reins. "He's giving us a chance," he said urgently. "We can't waste it." With a last glance back, Clara spurred her horse forward, following Nate as they galloped away from Silver Creek, the precious evidence of Camden's corruption secure but their futures more uncertain than ever. They rode hard for hours, pushing the horses as much as they dared, taking advantage of every bit of cover the landscape offered. Only when the sun began to set did Nate finally signal to slow their pace, both horses lathered with sweat and breathing heavily. "We need to rest them," he said, gesturing to a cluster of boulders that would provide some shelter. "And I need to check that evidence is still intact." As they dismounted, Clara noticed the dark stain spreading on Nate's left sleeve. "You're hit," she said, moving quickly to his side. Nate glanced at his arm as if noticing the wound for the first time. "Just a graze," he said dismissively. "The documents are what matter." Clara insisted on treating the wound anyway, using water from their canteens and strips from her petticoat as bandages. It was indeed just a graze, but in the desert, even minor wounds could become deadly if infection set in. While she worked, Nate carefully extracted the papers from inside his shirt, checking that everything was still legible. "It's all here," he confirmed. Telegram ordering the hits, contracts showing the railroad plans, even receipts for payments to Camden from this Harrington character. "Will it be enough?" Clara asked, tying off the bandage, "for Judge McAllister?" "Yes." Nate tucked the papers into his saddlebag. "He's known for his integrity. If we can get these to him, he'll issue warrants for Camden and this Harrington immediately." Clara sat back on her heels, suddenly overwhelmed by the events of the day. "What about Caleb? Will he be all right?" Nate's expression sobered. "Caleb's survived worse. But Camden won't be gentle if he's caught him." He ran a hand through his hair. "Our best chance of helping him is getting these papers to Tucson as fast as possible." They allowed themselves and their horses only a brief rest before continuing on, now traveling more cautiously. Tucson was at least 3 days' hard ride away, and they had to assume Camden would send men after them once he realized what documents they had taken. Night had fully fallen when they finally made camp, choosing a defensible position among rocks that overlooked the trail behind them. They built no fire, sharing cold biscuits and jerky from their saddlebags. "We should take turns keeping watch," Nate said as they finished their meager meal. "I'll take first shift." Clara nodded, suddenly aware of how exhausted she was. The adrenaline that had carried her through the day was fading, leaving her drained. She spread her blanket in the shelter of the rocks, but sleep eluded her despite her fatigue. After a while, she sat up, looking to where Nate kept his vigil, a dark silhouette against the star-filled sky. She rose and moved to join him. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked as she settled beside him. "Too many thoughts," she admitted. "About Caleb, about what happens next." She paused. "About us." Nate turned to look at her, his features barely visible in the darkness. "There's still in us after all this." "Isn't there?" Clara asked softly. "Or was what you said in the wiki-up just words?" His hand found hers in the darkness. "No," he said quietly, "not just words." He drew a deep breath. "But I have nothing to offer you, Clara. Even if we clear my name, I'm just a hired gun with saddle sores and too many memories. You deserve better." "Don't tell me what I deserve," Clara said, a fierce edge to her voice. "I've been told what to do and how to think by men all my life. My choices are my own now." She turned toward him fully. "And I choose you, Nate Quinn, the man who came back looking for me, the man who was willing to die protecting me from Camden, the man I've somehow been waiting for without even knowing it." In the starlight, she saw his expression soften. Without words, he pulled her gently into his arms, his lips finding hers in a kiss that spoke more eloquently than any declaration. Clara responded with all the pent-up emotion of the past days, the fear, the uncertainty, the growing certainty that this man was somehow meant to be part of her life. When they finally parted, Nate rested his forehead against hers. "If we survive this," he murmured, "if we clear my name, would you consider starting somewhere fresh? There's good land in Colorado, we could build something together." "Yes," Clara whispered without hesitation. "Anywhere, as long as it's with you." The promise hung between them, fragile but real, as they kept watch together through the night. Morning brought renewed determination. They set out at first light, pushing their horses as hard as they dared while remaining vigilant for pursuit. The landscape grew increasingly arid as they traveled south, the sun beating down mercilessly. By midday of the second day, Clara noticed Nate's movements becoming stiff, his face drawn with more than just fatigue. When they stopped to water the horses at a small seep, she insisted on checking his wound. "It's nothing," he protested, but his wince when she unwrapped the bandage told a different story. The bullet graze was inflamed, angry red streaks beginning to spread outward from the wound. Clara's heart sank as she recognized the early signs of infection. "This isn't nothing," she said firmly. "We need to treat it properly." Using the last of White Willow's herbs mixed with water, she made a poultice, applying it to the wound before rebandaging it. "This should help, but you need rest, Nate, and proper medicine." "Can't stop," he said, though his voice lacked its usual strength. "Camden's men could be right behind us." Clara knew he was right, they couldn't afford to delay. But she also knew that if the infection worsened, Nate might not make it to Tucson at all. They pushed on through the afternoon, the terrain growing more rugged as they approached the mountains that separated them from Tucson. Nate's condition deteriorated steadily, his face flushed with fever by the time they made camp that evening. Clara helped him dismount, alarmed at the heat radiating from his skin. "Nate, you're burning up," she said, guiding him to sit in the shade of a boulder. "Just need to rest a bit," he mumbled, his eyes unfocused. "We'll keep going soon." Clara made him as comfortable as possible, using the last of their water to bathe his face and coax him to drink. She knew they were in serious trouble. Nate's fever was climbing, their water was nearly gone, and they were still at least a day's ride from Tucson. As night fell, Nate's condition worsened. He drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes muttering incoherently, sometimes calling out names Clara didn't recognize. She sat beside him, cooling his forehead with a damp cloth, her worry growing with each passing hour. In a moment of lucidity, Nate grasped her hand. "The papers," he said urgently. "If I don't make it, don't talk like that," Clara interrupted fiercely. "You're going to be fine." He shook his head weakly. "Listen to me. If something happens, take the evidence to McAllister, tell him everything." His fever-bright eyes held hers. "Promise me." "I promise," she whispered, her throat tight with unshed tears. "But it won't come to that. We'll get there together." Nate's eyes drifted closed again, his breathing labored. Clara sat in the darkness, feeling more alone than she ever had before. The vast, indifferent desert surrounded them, and the man she loved fought for his life beside her. Morning brought no improvement. Nate was delirious with fever, barely conscious. Clara knew she had to get him to help immediately. The problem was, she had no idea how to transport him in his condition. As she was contemplating this dilemma, a sound reached her ears, hoofbeats, approaching from the direction they had come. Clara's heart raced. Camden's men had found them. She quickly gathered their belongings, tucking the precious documents securely inside her dress. She would have to make a stand here, try to hold off their pursuers long enough for Nate to have a chance. Drawing her rifle, Clara positioned herself among the rocks, ready to defend the unconscious Nate with her life if necessary. As the riders came into view, she tightened her finger on the trigger, then froze in surprise. Leading the small party of horsemen was Running Fox, the young Apache who had guided them days before. Behind him rode 4 more Apache warriors, and to Clara's astonishment, Caleb Fisher. "Clara," Caleb called, spotting her among the rocks. "Hold your fire, we're here to help." Clara lowered her weapon, relief washing over her in a dizzying wave. She scrambled down from her position, meeting them as they dismounted. "How did you find us?" she asked, embracing Caleb briefly. "We thought Camden had caught you." "Nearly did," Caleb admitted, showing a bloodied bandage on his arm. "But I know Silver Creek better than he does. Managed to circle back to my store and grab supplies before heading out. Figured you'd be making for Tucson." He glanced around. "Where's Quinn?" "Here," Clara said, leading them to where Nate lay in the shade. "He's been shot. The wound's infected and he's burning with fever." Running Fox knelt beside Nate, examining him with practiced eyes. "He is very sick," the young Apache confirmed, "but we brought medicines. My grandmother sent them when I told her we were coming to find you." As Running Fox and one of the other Apache warriors treated Nate's wound with White Willow's remedies, Caleb explained how he had escaped Camden and sought help from their Apache allies. "Camden's in a panic," he told Clara. "Those documents you took there more damning than even I realized. There's a telegram that directly connects him to Samuel Quincy's murder." He lowered his voice. "And there's more. This Harrington fellow, he's not just any railroad man, he's a former senator with powerful friends. If this scheme is exposed, it will ruin him, which makes him even more desperate to stop us," Clara concluded grimly. Caleb nodded. "Camden sent riders in all directions looking for you, but they're watching the main trails to Tucson. They won't expect us to take the route Running Fox suggests." He studied her face. "You look exhausted, Clara. When did you last sleep?" Clara couldn't remember. The past 24 hours had been a blur of fear and worry for Nate. "I'm fine," she insisted. "How soon can we move Nate?" "Soon," Running Fox said, joining them. "The medicine is strong. It will fight the fever. We have made a travois to carry him." Within an hour, they were ready to depart. Nate, still unconscious but breathing more easily, was secured to a travois attached to one of the Apache horses. Clara rode beside him, watchful for any signs of distress. Caleb and Running Fox led the way, taking them on a route known only to the Apache, a path through the mountains that would bypass the main trails where Camden's men might be waiting. The journey was arduous, the terrain unforgiving, but by nightfall, Nate's fever had begun to subside. When they made camp in a protected canyon, he finally regained consciousness, his eyes clearing as they focused on Clara's worried face. "You're still here," he murmured. Clara smiled through tears of relief. "Always would be," she replied softly, echoing her words from their first meeting. Understanding dawned in Nate's eyes, memory of their initial encounter returning. "You saved me again," he said, reaching weakly for her hand. "Not just me this time," Clara said, gesturing to where Caleb and their Apache allies prepared the evening meal. "We have friends." Nate's recovery accelerated with proper treatment and rest. By the time they reached the outskirts of Tucson 2 days later, he was able to ride on his own, though still weak from his ordeal. The Apache warriors left them there, returning to their territory, but Running Fox remained, curious to see justice done. Judge McAllister's home was on the edge of town, a modest adobe structure that belied his importance in territorial affairs. The old judge received them immediately, his weathered face grave as Caleb introduced them and explained their mission. "These are serious accusations," McAllister said after examining the documents. "Very serious indeed, but the evidence appears substantial." He looked up at them. "You realize, of course, that by bringing this to me, you've made powerful enemies. Harrington has connections in Washington that reach to the highest levels." "We understand the risk," Nate said firmly, "but Samuel Quincy was my friend. He deserves justice." McAllister studied him thoughtfully, then nodded. "Very well. I'll issue warrants for Camden and Harrington immediately. In the meantime, you'll stay here as my guests. You'll be safer under my roof until this matter is resolved." The next days passed in a flurry of activity. Territorial marshals were dispatched to arrest Camden. Telegrams flew between Tucson and Washington. Nate gave his formal statement about the events leading to Blackwater's murder and his own framing, with Clara and Caleb providing corroborating testimony. A week after their arrival, news came that Camden had been apprehended trying to flee to Mexico. Harrington, however, had disappeared, though his assets had been frozen and a nationwide alert issued for his arrest. "It may take time to catch him," Judge McAllister told them over dinner that evening. "But his reputation is ruined, his scheme exposed. The land transfers have been invalidated, and the Circle Q will be held in trust for young Thomas Quincy until he comes of age." "What happens until then?" Clara asked. "The court will appoint a trustee to manage the property," McAllister explained. "Someone with experience in ranching and an impeccable reputation for honesty." His eyes twinkled as he looked at Nate. "I was hoping Mr. Quinn might consider taking on the responsibility." Nate looked stunned. "Me, but I'm just a hired hand." "You were Samuel Quincy's most trusted employee," the judge reminded him, "and you risked your life to bring his killers to justice. I can think of no one better to safeguard his legacy until his nephew is old enough to claim it." Nate glanced at Clara, a question in his eyes. She smiled encouragingly, her heart full. This was more than either of them had dared hope for, a chance to build a life together, to heal the land and themselves. "I'd be honored," Nate said finally, turning back to the judge. "But I have one condition." He reached for Clara's hand. "Miss Wilson will be my wife and partner in this endeavor. Her knowledge of the land and healing will be invaluable to the ranch." Clara's breath caught. Though they had spoken of a future together, this formal declaration, this public claiming of their bond, made it suddenly, wonderfully real. "Is that agreeable to you, Miss Wilson?" Judge McAllister asked, eyes twinkling. "Very agreeable, Your Honor," Clara replied, her voice steady despite the joy threatening to overwhelm her. 2 weeks later, Clara stood on the porch of the Circle Q ranch house, watching the sunset paint the vast landscape in gold and crimson. Behind her, the sounds of celebration drifted from the house: laughter, music, the clink of glasses as friends and neighbors toasted her marriage to Nate, performed that afternoon by Judge McAllister himself. Caleb was there, already planning to open a branch of his store nearby. Running Fox had returned to his people but promised to visit often, especially since Clara had expressed interest in learning more about White Willow's healing methods. Even Samuel Quincy's sister had sent her blessing from Boston, grateful that her son's inheritance would be in such trustworthy hands. Footsteps sounded behind her, and then Nate's arms encircled her waist, drawing her back against his chest. "What are you doing out here alone, Mrs. Quinn?" He murmured, his breath warm against her ear. "There's a celebration in your honor inside." Clara leaned into his embrace, savoring the strength and warmth of him. "Just thinking how strange life's paths can be," she replied. "If I hadn't found you under that cottonwood." "You'd have found me somewhere else," Nate said with certainty. "Some things are meant to be, Clara. I've believed that since the day I first saw you, a young girl with a rifle and the steadiest hands I'd ever seen." Clara turned in his arms, looking up into the blue eyes that had captivated her from the beginning. "You really did come back for me, didn't you, after all those years?" "I did," he confirmed, "and I always will." He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "No matter what comes, no matter what challenges we face, I'll always come back to you, Clara Quinn. And I'll always be waiting," she promised. Always would. As the sun slipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the land that was now their responsibility and their home, Nate lowered his mouth to hers in a kiss that sealed their vows more surely than any ceremony could have done. 10 years later, Clara sat on that same porch, watching her children playing in the yard: 8-year-old Samuel, named for the man whose legacy they protected, and 6-year-old Margaret, who already showed signs of inheriting her mother's gift for healing. Beyond them, the Circle Q ranch spread in all directions, thriving under their care. The drought years had tested them, as had the occasional brushes with rustlers and the constant challenges of frontier life. But together, they had built something that would last: a home, a family, a future for young Thomas Quincy, now 18 and learning the ranching business under Nate's careful tutelage. Clara smiled as she caught sight of Nate riding in from checking the northern pastures. Tall and straight in the saddle, despite the old wound that sometimes troubled him in cold weather. Their eyes met across the distance, and even after all these years, her heart quickened at the love she saw there. He dismounted at the hitching post, exchanging a few words with Thomas before making his way to the porch. His hair was touched with gray now at the temples, new lines etched around his eyes, but to Clara, he was more handsome than ever, seasoned by life and love and the hard-won peace they had created together. "How are my favorite ladies today?" he asked, dropping a kiss on Clara's head before scooping up little Margaret, who had run to meet him. "Mama's been teaching me about the plants again," Margaret announced proudly. "I can name all the healing ones now." "Is that so?" Nate asked, settling the child on his hip. "You'll be as skilled as your mother before we know it," Clara smiled, watching them together. In her pocket, she carried a letter that had arrived that morning, news from Judge McAllister that Harrington had finally been captured in Europe and would stand trial for his crimes. The last loose end of their past was being tied neatly closed, but that news could wait. For now, she was content to watch her family, the husband who had journeyed through fire and darkness to find her, the children who represented their hope for the future, and the land that had challenged and rewarded them in equal measure. As the sunset painted the sky in the same fiery hues it had on the day they first became a family, Clara remembered the cottonwood tree where their story had begun, where she had found a half-dead cowboy with fever-bright eyes who had somehow recognized her soul. "You came," he had whispered then. "Always would," she had replied, not knowing then how true those words would prove to be through danger and joy, through struggle and triumph, through all the days and years that had brought them to this moment of perfect contentment. Always would, always had, always would again.